Retro Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bonsert of Radio Retro Future, and today I want to talk to you about Show Don't Tell, because it's one of those very badly understood topics in writing, and it's very poorly discussed when you ask me. At least I have never heard anyone discuss Show Don't Tell in the way I'm about to, so let's get started. But first, a word from our sponsor, the Association of Ishtar. The Association of Ishtar is a multiverse of steampunk adventure and cosmic mystery in which the Association of Ishtar is trying to protect its world from the many threats lurking in a multiverse. Currently in the series we have 2 books, a coloring book and several comic books in the making, and we are taking this to Kickstarter next year. The pre-launch page is already up and you can help us support this project by following the link down below. And the more followers we get, the more we are going to offer, like this miniature of Igraine Mortiba, which we will include when we reach 50 followers on the platform. In the future we want to make videos with original art, and we also want to expand our universe into the realm of board games, and after that we'll see where it goes. So please help us by following the website down below if we reach 30 followers before, and don't forget to follow the associationofishtar.com, because soon we'll also give some gifts away to anyone who follows and subscribes to our mailing list. So I hope you'll support this project, and let's get on with the video. Why do we use Show Don't Tell? I mean, I know it's a mantra, I know it's repeated ad nauseum, but why do it? And the simple answer is to create immersion. Okay, well, how do we create immersion, you ask? Well, let's discuss that. But first, let's discuss what it isn't, and that is probably tell. Now, it's not entirely true that tell does not create immersion. As a matter of fact, we use a lot of tell in story writing. Let me give you an example. Imagine you are going to a place of work, or let's say you go to school, and you notice that one of your fellow colleagues or students is missing. And you go up to another student and you say, hey, where is this person? And he will simply say something, well, he's not in today because he has a splitting headache. And you're like, oh, well, that explains everything. This is how we normally talk, and it's all the information that we need. A lot of aspiring writers, however, write that way. And that is where it goes wrong, because we are very much, well, when we start writing, we are very much in the same mindset as we would have a normal conversation, and where such a statement is enough to get us through the story. However, show is very different. Let's use another example. Let's say you are describing a scene where a scout returns to his general and starts describing a situation that is ahead of them. And the scout tells the general, sir, the enemy is entrenched in a dense forest. And you say, well, that's clear, right? We know the context, which is military, so we see the whole situation from a military point of view, and we all have an idea of all the difficulties that that situation would bring. They are very protected, it's probably dark in there, vehicles can't get through, yada yada yada. And this is tell. However, we would definitely use this in a scene such as these. So tell absolutely has its place in narrative storytelling, however, mostly for dialogue. And this is also why dialogue is often used, be it intentionally or subconsciously, to deliver information on the reader, because we accept that characters are talking that way. It's realistic, in other words, and thus it creates a form of immersion. Now, does it mean that you can treat dialogue as a replacement for exposition? As a matter of fact, that's often what it gets lambasted when, for example, in movies, but that's for another time. However, what about narrative sentences? What about sentences that is just about the story itself and not characters talking? How do you deal with that? Now imagine the same situation. You tell the reader that a character is running through a dense forest. And I've seen writing like this. As a matter of fact, a lot of writers do it. But what does that mean? Why doesn't that invoke any statements of, emotional reactions? Why doesn't that invoke any sense of tension or anything? I mean, the character is running through a dense forest. That's exciting, right? Well, it could be, but for some reason, when I say that, you probably are like, there's no reaction from you. Why not? Let's look at it from the creative point of view. Let's say you're a movie director, and the movie director, is talking to the cameraman who has to shoot the scene of the character running through the dense forest. Okay. Then the director noticed something, that the cameraman is getting a bit nervous. And he's wondering, why, what's wrong? And the cameraman says, well, okay, you say he's running through a dense forest, but how dense are we talking? Like, can I move with my camera through it? Can I run around with him? And then the director is like, well, I mean, yeah, there's enough room between the trees to run after the guy. That shouldn't be a problem, but, the ground is a bit soft, though, so you have to wear proper boots, and, well, it's pretty humid in there, so, yeah, you better make sure that your equipment stays dry. Oh, and, yeah, also light. Light can be a problem in certain parts, so, yeah, you better bring extra lighting, or, actually, there's all these preparations you need to do to actually film properly, and that right there, what I described there, that is the answers you need. That's the questions you need to answer when you are doing show. What does that mean in practice? We have a couple of senses. 5 of them, a matter of fact. First off is we have touch. We can feel things. We can feel if something is hot or cold. We have taste. We can taste if something tastes good or not good. People often, instead of saying, oh, he tasted blood, he said, the taste of metal was on his tongue. You have to think now, don't you, what that means? We know what it means, but you have to think about it. It creates engagement. Now, then we can see. We can see light and dark. We can hear. We can see if noises are loud or not loud, or sudden or odd. Some voices invoke dread, even. You see, that is invoking those senses, invoking those thoughts of noises, tastes, feelings. That is what creates show. And that's why it's not enough to say he's running through a dense forest, because what does that mean? Is he running through the dark forest? Is it moist? Is it foggy? Like, are the branches breaking beneath his boots as he runs through the soft ground? Like, or is it like all mud puddles, etc.? And now that's interesting. That is what is starting to create immersion, because now we know what's actually like to be in a dense forest. Now, are adjectives always bad? Not really, but they are best to be avoided. As a matter of fact, when you are editing, adjectives are often the first words to go. One of them, especially from someone who's also recording audiobooks, adjectives often break the flow of a sentence. Also, well, we already used the example of a dense forest. Or let's say tall man. Okay, tall compared to whom? It's relative. Or a scary man. Okay, well, what makes him scary? Now, there are adjectives that are useful, such as an orange speaker, or a wireless speaker, or a Wi-Fi speaker, or a Bluetooth speaker. These are very specific words with very specific meanings. When something is orange, it isn't green. To name just an example. So adjectives can be very useful, but when they become abstract, like dense or difficult, or name any type of abstract word really that has multiple meanings, and it probably needs to go and needs to be replaced with something that actually describes what makes, let's say, terrain difficult. Is it difficult terrain because it's muddy, or is it difficult terrain because it's a bog, or is it difficult terrain because, and so on. Okay, so now we know what to avoid. How to do it well. How do we know what details to include? Well, first off, we need to know what makes a location unique. Well, we use the example of a dense forest. Last time I saw someone using the name of an alley. The character is running into an alley. Okay, well, what's the alley like then? Like, is it a dirty alley? Is it like an alley filled with trash? Is the alley clean? Is it the alley between apartment blocks, so there's like laundry and stuff above it? Is it an alley between restaurants, so you have all these trash bins smelling of rotten food and so on? Again, you already notice like me invoking visuals, me invoking senses of smell, the ground. Like maybe it's a flooded alley where there's like this massive splash of water on the ground. All those things help the reader visualize what the character is going through, why this is an event that is worth watching. So, what helps us? Well, as an allegory, I already used the idea of a cameraman and his director. Perspective is also important, you see. Let's say you want to have a scene that involves somebody kicking in a door. Now that can be filmed in multiple ways, isn't it? You can film it from behind, so you are kind of looking over the shoulder of the characters as they kick in the door. Or you could be standing on the other side of the door and you see only as the door gets kicked in and suddenly this person appears in the door opening. Or it can be the character kicking in the door. So it's actually the character kicking the door. So you also get a very different sentence again. So perspective is important. And I am using now the allegory of a film. Well, maybe you're not much of a film buff, you haven't watched a lot of films. So what else can we use? Comics. When you look at a comic, they are also drawn from a particular perspective. They have certain lighting, they have characters doing particular actions, etc. And of course then there's the dialogue. I personally like to think in comic book panels. And the reason for this is why. And whenever you ask a comic book artist, like, how do you write a script for a comic book? And they'll immediately say, well, it's very simple. Every panel is a single sentence. And every sentence contains one action. And that is both true for writing. And I'm very surprised that more, even professional writers, are not aware of this. But every sentence has a single action. If you try to stick more action in the sentence, it just becomes cluttered and it often becomes unclear what is even happening. Believe it or not, readers have an attention span. And they can only focus on so much. So, how to write a comic book panel? Well, again, you focus on the most important action in the scene, which is often performed by the protagonist. For example, you're now looking at me in a frame, which is me presenting. Bonsart is presenting his video. That is the subject of your panel. If you want more information about this, and where I also use this allegory, I have a blog called How to Write a Sentence, where I go in depth and the do's and don'ts of writing a sentence, which I highly recommend. And I'll post a link in the description. I'm also working on a blog about immersion, which includes show, don't tell. But it's not finished at the moment that I'm recording this. So I'll try and finish that and post a link down below as well, which I highly suggest you read. Because I'm going into much more detail than here, because I am assuming you're listening while doing something else rather than anything else. So, comic book panels. One character doing an action, that's what the focus is on. But other things could be happening around the character. For example, a character can say something and pour his orange juice. In that case, the sentence would be, while pouring his orange juice, the character says. Another example. He is cleaning his room while listening to the radio. So the most important action is he's cleaning his room. And meanwhile, he's listening to the radio, which is happening in the background. To make that distinction, again, I'm referring to the blog, is by stating the things that are happening in the background in the present particle. And that's really all there is to it, but again, that leads to a lot of practice. And for that, you have to start writing and start working. But for now, what I want to emphasize is, what do you do to create immersion? You see, it's one thing to say show don't tell, and it's one thing to follow my instructions and think about the things that I just said, but you also have to think about perspective. Who is seeing what? How do you engage the readers? Etc., etc. How do you describe your environments? That is the goal of show don't tell, and that is what you will need to practice on. It's probably the most difficult part of learning how to write, is to create that immersion. And, well, all I can do from this point on is wish you luck. Again, I highly recommend you read my blog, How to Write a Sentence, and I'll try to get the other blog done in time, so you can look at that as well. For those who want to practice, we have a Discord where I have several threads dedicated to practicing writing. One of them is Submit Your Lines, where people can submit 5 lines. This is what I highly recommend unexperienced writers to do, instead of submitting entire scenes or texts. Let people look at individual lines and pick those apart. And when that's adequate, there is no such thing as perfection, just good enough, you can start submitting your lines to Submit Your Scenes, where people can pick your scenes apart. And once that's adequate, maybe it's time for short stories and then books. And I also highly recommend you start with short stories instead of books, because writing is a craft. Writing is an art. It's not something you learn over the weekend. It's something you need to practice and hone, and I cannot emphasize that enough. And with that, I'm gonna bid you adieu. And please follow our Kickstarter that we have planned to launch next week. We are currently working on a pre-launch page and getting the word out, so I would highly appreciate if you would give that a follow. And of course, you can check out our own store, University Association of Ishtar, at www.associationofishtar.com. So yeah, and with that, all I can say is make things your way. Good night.